So on today's 10 at 10, what I'm going to cover literally can save your career. It can save your marriage. It can save your relationship with your kids. It can save a friendship. It can save a lot of things. I'm going to be talking about a 207 brain. So 207 in the California Penal Code is kidnapping. And the term Daniel Goleman used in a TED Talk back in 1995, he used the term amygdala hijack, or hijacking your amygdala. And that's what I'm talking about for just a few minutes. Now, in 10 and 10, we take 10 minutes and hit the bullet points. If there's more that we need to dive into, you can stick around for the rest of it, and you're welcome to do that, or you can just bounce and come back later. But tonight, it's going to be just a short 10 minutes, but a really important 10 minutes, because what I'm going to do is give you a tool that you can use. It's going to be really simple, but highly effective in dealing with an amygdala hijack. And I guarantee you, somebody's going to come along. They're going to try to reach inside your brain and flip that switch and set you off and push your buttons. And there's some people that are just, they're just really good at it. And what we're going to do is we're going to prepare for that person to do exactly that and recognize it before it actually happens, before we start to have a stress response, before we snap, say something that we shouldn't, do something that we shouldn't, things that we have to go back and apologize for, or take a honk on for discipline at work. So real quick, the amygdala, I refer to it as the fear center of the brain. It handles a lot of other emotions than fear. But when you think about it as the fear center of the brain, it's really easy and simple to remember. It sits back, it's about the size and shape of an almond. It's 0.3% of your total brain mass. It's a tiny, tiny part of your brain, but it's a critical part. Sometimes it's referred to as the lizard brain, the reptilian brain. It works on instinct. And when it gets triggered, especially fear, it kicks off the fight or flight response, your parasympathetic nervous system response. It jacks up your adrenaline, dilates your pupils. It's really important for a survival mechanism, but most of the time, we don't need to be in survival mode, even as cops. Now, it's kind of interesting, and I have another 10 to 10. I'm going to expand on this more, but I want to share this with you really quickly. Your brain is in one of two states at any given moment, just one of two. It's either in a survival state, which is that sympathetic nervous system response, or it's in an executive state. Now, when you're in an executive state, you're thinking with your prefrontal cortex. You're making well-reasoned, logical decisions. When you're in a survival state, you're operating under stress. And what's interesting is, even though we live in a relatively safe world for law enforcement officers, because we're constantly dealing with stressful situations and we're constantly evaluating danger, over 70% of the time, our brains are working in a survival state. And that's hard on you. That's why Dr. Gil Martin wrote Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement, which is an amazing book, by the way. And I highly recommend that book. But what I want to talk about right now is, if you know that you're going to be in a survival state, if you know you're likely to get triggered, how do you prepare for that? How do you recognize that it's coming before it even happens? It works like this. And the tool I'm going to give you is a PDF download that's going to be available at tomorrowspoliceofficer.com. When you look under the law enforcement resources button, click on that. And on that web page that it takes you to, you're going to see this download. And the PDF, it's just a simple PDF. It's a worksheet for you to use. The benefit of that is it takes you right through the process I'm going to describe now. And that process is really simple. There are times when you have gotten upset before. There are triggers that you have that you already know about. And what I'd like you to do is, if you don't have a piece of paper handy where you can jot this down, a scrap piece of paper, or maybe even a journal would be good to do this in. Grab your cell phone, and every cell phone has a notepad app on it, and just create a notepad. And you can title it Triggers or Amygdala Hijack or 207 Brain, whatever you want to title that note. And what I want you to start doing is this. I want you to start jotting down things that upset you, situations where you can think back and go, man, I have no idea why this set me off, but it set me off. You know, I can remember a couple from my past, and one of them as a cop is I did not like being told no. If I directed somebody to do something, especially when safety was involved, and they didn't do what I wanted them to do, or or there was a flat out refusal, or just that non-compliance, they look at you, should I do it? Should I not? That used to set me off when I was a brand new cop. And thankfully, I had somebody take me through a very similar exercise to this one, and I identified it, and I knew that would set me off, so I was able to prepare for it. You know, another one was when I was helping to raise a young boy who had ADHD. An awesome kid. He's about 5-6 years old at the time that this happened. At work, I had dealt with a teenager who was running through a parking lot at a store, at a mini strip mall. And his kid ran out in front of a car. And whether the car didn't stop when they should have, or the kid ran out in front of the car, nobody was really sure. But the bottom line is, had the kid not been run through the parking lot, the accident wouldn't happen. And the kid was seriously injured. And so I happened to catch that call, and I did the investigation on that collision. And literally the next day, 5-year-old that I'm responsible for takes off for me and does what 5-6-year-olds do. They run through parking lots. They have fun. They're kids. And I yelled out at him to stop, and he kept going. And so I yelled louder, and there was a tone to my voice, and it scared him. It startled him, and he got upset. And I remember his older sister going, "What are you yelling at him like that for?" Well, I knew the potential of what could happen. I didn't want him to get hurt. I was worried about him. Remember what I've said before, and if you haven't heard me say this, check out the other 10 at 10s. Fear and anger are roommates. Was I mad at him? Yeah, I was mad at him because he wasn't listening. And that's certainly the tone that my voice had, was that I was angry. Was I stressed? Without question, I was worried he was going to get hurt. So my anger, where did that come from? It was rooted in fear. See, anger is not a primary emotion. What that means is you don't have anger by itself. It comes from somewhere. Almost always comes from fear. So if someone, as a law enforcement officer in your capacity, someone tells you no, and there's a safety situation, are you going to be angry? Maybe it's not in your personality. Maybe it is. Maybe because you fear for their safety or your safety. If you tell somebody who has a weapon to stop and they don't, and they continue to approach you, are you going to fear for your safety? Yes. Might you sound and be angry? Yes, you might. Because fear and anger are roommates. They live in the same house. They're like identical twins almost. Different, but many of the same characteristics in common. So this exercise, it's simple, but not necessarily easy. And it takes some self-reflection. It takes you being a little bit vulnerable with yourself. It takes you being honest with yourself. You need to think, what is it that sets me off? When is it that I get upset? When is it that I yell at my spouse, at my coworkers? When is it that I get upset with my boss? When is it that somebody on my squad that works for me is frustrating me to no end? When is it that I don't want to work with this other deputy? What are those situations? What are your triggers? What are your buttons? If you're willing to, I'd love for you to maybe share some in the comments below, if you don't mind, because you're going to help somebody else out that's listening to this video, that's reading your post, because they're going to realize, hey, I'm not alone in this. And I hope that by sharing my triggers, my buttons, those are not by means my only ones. They're just a couple of them. But if it helps you, and I hope it does, then it's worth sharing with you. So when you know what your buttons and triggers are, you're more aware of that. And when you face that situation, when you know that situation is popping up, you can go, oh, I'm about to be triggered. And you can start to step back from that fear, from that anger, from that emotional snap response. And you stay in an executive state, not a survival state. It's a whole lot less stress for you. Higher performance. I'm gonna talk I'm gonna spend a whole 10 at 10 just talking about each of those states and the benefits of staying in an executive state. Think about it. 70% of our life we're running around in a survival state. I think it's even higher now with the pandemic stuff going on and the politics stuff going on. So think about these things. Go through this exercise. Go to tomorrowspoliceofficer.com. Look under the law enforcement resources, download that PDF, step through this process so that you're better prepared and your brain doesn't get 207. Thanks for being here. Please like this video. Write down below your triggers. If you're on YouTube, help us out. Click on that subscribe button and then click on that little bell next to the subscribe button so you get notified when a new 10 at 10 drops. Doing this every day for you. That's it for now. Until next time, stay safe.